Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. I say another one because my goodness, I can't stop producing content at the moment because my goodness, the world is going to hell in a handcart. Crazy stuff is happening all over the world. Ukraine, I think, as I keep saying to you, is at the center of the spider's web of global geopolitics. And I think you can probably put any big event at the center and work things out from there. But I really do believe that, that the war in Ukraine and Ukraine's plight is central to the future of the entire world. And it's a shame that in the United States of America at the moment, as we can see from their vice president, from the Secretary of Defense and the president himself, they might have different views on the importance of Ukraine. And we're going to talk somewhat about that, no doubt, and what Ukrainians think about that with my guest today, who is omnipresent in the world of reporting on Ukraine. He has his, in fact, let's, before I let him introduce himself, let's just throw out some of his socials. Here he is on Twitter, you can, or X, you can find him at Caolan Rob, also on Blue Sky. Caolan Rob, again, go and find Caolan Robertson. He is a reporter involved. I didn't realize how thoroughly involved in Byline TV he is, and there's, I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about Under Deadly Skies, which is a project he was involved in. But anyway, that's enough of me waffling. Thanks, Caolan, so much for joining us. Can you let my audience know who don't know who you are, like who you are and what you do, and how you found yourself in Ukraine?
Yeah, so I am British-Irish journalist. I co-founded Byline TV, which is, it's sort of the video offshoot of Byline Times about 4.5, nearly 5 years ago.
Wow.
And I did that because when I graduated from school, I started just being super interested in storytelling, filmmaking, not so much journalism. I didn't know that much about politics. I got a job for the first time presenting political stuff and doing a bit of filming with some right-wing channels when I was super young, like 19, Rebel Media. We know what they are, you know, if you're familiar with right-wing politics. Did that for about 6 months, talking about free speech issues in Britain, then realized that actually right-wing politics is an absolute disaster if you want to actually I mean, how do I even explain that? It was my
You were
first
involved
time.
with Tommy Robinson, weren't you?
Yeah, well, he was hired by Rebel as well. I didn't really know much about him at the time because I was quite new to politics. And again, the stuff I was mainly focusing on was UK issues, stuff to do with Brexit, stuff to do with free speech. And then they hired him. I started really going along with a lot of the stuff he said about Islam and gay people. I came out when I was gay. I started believing a lot of this stuff. And then as time went by, I started realizing that they were just awful people, quite frankly. And the kind of politics I'd become involved in, the echo chamber around it, the nefarious funding around it, everything just felt really wrong. So I spent years exposing a lot of that stuff, how it works. I had an insight into it. Exposing, you know, Alex Jones, who I'd worked with briefly, people at Rebel Media, and writing about how disinformation works and how the far right works as someone that briefly had an insight into it. Because I was even, you know, annoyed at myself for having been involved in it for a brief period of time. But it gave me a level of insight, a bit like how Bill Browder now talks about, you know, Putin. He worked with Putin. A lot of people who used to work in these organizations and with nefarious groups really see it from the inside, and so they're quite good at exposing it. So Peter Jukes reached out to me. He's the CEO of Byline Times, founder of that paper, and he said, we want to do a really big expose on the right, the networks, how it's funded. And I gave them all this great information. And then they said, you were really good at filming, you know, you were really effective in that right-wing content. Why don't you put that to good use and do something positive with it? So that's when we started Byline TV. And
Wow.
yeah, it was kind of born out of that, which was really interesting.
Caolan, like in the future, hopefully near distant future, can we just do a whole chat on disinformation and your experiences that you were just expressing?
Yeah, well, yeah, I haven't even talked about the full extent of it and how it all works. And I'm still even putting a lot of the pieces together now, seeing some of the figures I saw now being exposed in the, you know, the Tenet media scandal and all these different tentacles of Russian influence. But a lot of it isn't surprising to me. But no, I want to write and talk a lot about it because it's super relevant now. But yeah, I mean, Brexit had just kicked in, and I was interviewing people that were farmers, Brexiteers, people that loved Farage and then saw their business in ruins. And I interviewed them and they say they regretted their vote and they were lied to. And I guess on a personal level, I've regretted being involved in the right. I felt lied to by a lot of those figures. And a lot of those films I made about people changing their political stance, people walking away from figures like Farage, regretting their vote for Brexit, were some of the biggest fundamental films for Byline TV. We made lots of documentaries traveling across the UK showing industries that believed in Brexit, but were then shattered when it kicked in. And that was
Did
super powerful.
Byline do a bunch of footage going down like the in Kent where there were all those long lines of lorries at the time? Was it
I filmed all
Byline?
that. Yeah, it was just
Yeah,
me.
was that?
Yeah.
Wow, I've watched
Yeah.
way more of you than I realised.
But I was always behind the camera
Yeah.
because I was good at filmmaking and editing and putting stuff together. So there was a fisherman, I don't remember him, called Ian Pearce, and he said, he stood in somewhere in Devon, and he was like, Boris Johnson promised that when Brexit kicked in, we wouldn't be able to hire enough staff because we'd have so much work, we'd have so much fish, we'd have so much things to do. And he said, actually, we now need to hire more staff because there's so much more paperwork and my business is in ruins. And I found all these people. I did a big report in Port Talbot about the steelworks that closed down because of Brexit-related EU funding. And it was really impactful. And that was kind of the main stuff that I did, about 3 documentaries, 200 news reports, all the Byline TV. And then the Ukraine war started. Russia invaded Ukraine, and John Sweeney was working with Byline at the time. So he has just done a film with me. I went to Perugia with him, and we did a film called Compromat that I directed, where we were investigating Boris Johnson's links with Alexander Lebedev in the Russian mountain in Perugia. This was a very dodgy mansion that the Lebedevs owned, where they would fly high-profile people, celebrities, and looks like they get compromat on them.
Just to let the audience know, Lebedev he's now been he's in the House of Lords as a peer, and he owns the Independent newspaper, and he is very much involved in UK. I guess media politics as a Russian oligarch. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, well, this is what was so egregious. And so John calls me up and he said, Byline, I've just got an Italian intelligence report that suggests that Boris Johnson, who was then Home Secretary at the time, is compromised by the KGB. He's been to these parties. He flew out to Perugia on his own private travel, didn't take security with him, and we believe he's compromised. And so we turned that intelligence report into a documentary exposing those links and the links to Russia. That documentary came out January 2022. And then, so I started understanding Russia. We started figuring out what was happening, how it was working, what the tentacle was. I didn't know anything about Russia, really anything about propaganda to do with Russia to that extent, and nothing to do with Ukraine. And when the invasion happened 4 weeks later, John flew straight out here to the capital in Kyiv and started doing his war diaries that we know about. Every day one, the Russians are at the gates, this. And I remember just calling up Peter, calling up Byline, saying, I got to go to Ukraine and cover this because this feels like the follow-up story to this Russian influence, this stuff that we've been doing. John said, you got to get here now. And Peter said, Caolan, you've never been to even a protest, never mind a war. We're not sending you to Ukraine. So I was like, no, I really want to cover this. I think it could be really effective. So he said, we'll let you go to the border. So I get to, I think this was February 24th, I arrive at Medica, which is the border here on the Polish border. And I remember seeing waves of just humanity, of women and children pouring across the border and being absolutely astounded, and seeing Polish people from Berlin, people from France, all over the world, all over Europe, holding up posters with different city names on them in front of these refugees coming, that basically suggested, we live in this city. If you want to go to this city, jump in the car and we'll give you a place to live. And it was like the worst of humanity, because this is caused by fascism, pushing people out of their countries, but the best of humanity coming together to save them. It was unbelievable. So did reporting there, but was always really desperate to cross that border. I really wanted to come here and actually show what was going on, because a lot of our reporting was more effective than the mainstream media when I was covering Brexit, because it was brutally honest and it was really visceral, and I could package it really well. But about 11 months went by. I did lots of interviews with Bill Browder, lots of different people documenting the war. It was really hard to capture it not here. And it comes up to the first anniversary of the war, and Peter calls me up and says, all right, Caolan, I think you're ready to go to Ukraine. You can go for 1 week. and you can see you have to stay in Kyiv and do a quick film with John.
It's
And
been a long week.
Great.
Been a long week, mate.
Yeah, it's been a very long week, and that is when everything changed forever. So get on the train, get here, and get off. And I wanted to visualize the fact that like 100 or 200,000 civilians and Ukrainian soldiers had been killed at this point. And so I found a stadium in Bucha that was half partially destroyed, put John in the center of it, flew a drone around it, and said, imagine just to visualize this stadium times 100 gone, wiped off the face of the earth. That's what Russia did. Who should have been sitting on this seat? Imagine there's a sports game on and everyone's cheering and it goes silent. I'm quite good at visualizing just the quantity, because it's hard with numbers. And that was really effective. And I was getting ready to go back to the UK, and I went to Buena Vista, which is a bar a few doors down from here. I don't know if you know it, with John. And
I had it pointed out by Pierre when I was out there, but yeah.
Yeah, it's a Colombian, and these soldiers and volunteers were all sitting at a table at the back, and I just started speaking to them, and they said, we just come back from the front, and we're trained not to go near cats and dogs that might be wailing on the side of the road, because the Russians, when they retreated, put mines in their stomach to kill rescuers just trying to rescue them. Children are advised not to open teddy bears because they're mined. And I couldn't quite comprehend just the actual brutality of what was going on. And I guess I wasn't as informed as a lot of other people on the fact that this wasn't just a war between two armies. This was Russia versus fucking children, everyone alive here. And it was, I was shocked at myself for not even realizing how bad and serious it actually was. And I felt like that was a failure, maybe for the media in a lot of ways, not really showing Russian brutality, showing that there were two sides to this. But also, I was compelled to go and see that for myself and film it for myself.
Well, I think the mainstream media probably did a fairly good job at the beginning of the war, talking about the horrors, and everyone got on board. But now they've forgotten to do that. And I wonder whether the mainstream media are letting down Ukraine by, and we understand that these things get normalized. People get tired, that you get fatigued of watching the same sort of thing. I don't. I'm still every single day producing videos, but I think that they are missing a trick for Ukraine at the moment. The mainstream media, and these, when there are these horrible things that still happen, whether it be, a war crime over here, like execution of Ukrainian soldiers, I think is a key one that is not being reported nearly strongly enough. I think we're missing on reminding the general public in the UK, particularly in the US, as to how horrible the Russians are, and that there is this clear moral distinction between the Ukrainians and Russians.
Completely. I mean, this is what happens when it's the beginning of any conflict. All the journalists rush there. The hotels get booked up in that city, and there's an incredible amount of coverage. That's great. Fatigue happens much more quickly nowadays because we get all our information from 60-second sound bites on TikTok and Facebook, rather than actually watching full feature-length films, documentaries. We don't really read books much anymore. So society moves on, things move on. The hotels here, I could see it coming in 2023, 2024, now 2025. Less and less journalists are here. I mean, there's practically no cameras in the city center anymore, and that's also because of Gaza, but that's also because that's how things are now. It's also because there's not much money left in the mainstream media to keep people here full time. It's expensive. It's $20,000 a day to insure life insurance to go to the front for a journalist. So for BBC, CNN, it's insanely expensive sometimes. Kidnap, all of this. So there's a void, a huge void, and I kind of noticed that a year in, and I was like, how did I not know about the mind? Children's toys. How didn't I know about the fact that they're bombing and using white phosphorus? This is the rumors that they were telling me in this bar. White phosphorus against civilians in the east in a place called Donbass. I didn't know about that, so I wanted to go and film it. So John was like, Caolan, we're not going to the Donbass. Again, you've never even been to a protest unless you've at least had a bit of something. So we can make a bunch of phone calls. Paul Conroy answers the phone. He says, oh, I'm doing a HVAC training course right now. Just to
let people know who Paul Conroy is. So he is a video, he's a photographer who has been, he was with the great, what's her name, who died, unfortunately. Who died in Homs, I think it was, in Syria. And he's fantastic. In fact, I am due to interview him at some point, but he's been out in Kherson actually a lot, but I don't know where he is right now. But anyway, that's just to give people an idea of who he is. Sorry, carry on.
Yeah, and I'd met Paul because I'd watched the films about him, A Private War. I was fascinated with Marie at the Frontline Club. But he answered and he said, well, I'm running a training course here with the Ukrainian military. If Caolan's up for it, it's 3 days. Let's do it tomorrow. So tomorrow we start on this course, and it's like, you know, tourniquets, and it's all these videos training what to do with ballistic damage. There was those sort of all these sessions where they would sort of blindfold everyone, then take them off and make them run, and they'd have scenes with people, you know, with fake blood everywhere and ambulances. It was really, really well done, but it was to simulate, you know, extreme situations of a missile aftermath or something like that. So I did that, and then we got into a car. Paul was driving, John was in the passenger seat. Zarina Zabriskie, who's a US journalist, also in Kherson, was in the back seat, and we just headed east. Never had been anywhere like this before. And that's when I realized just how close the war was to home and to Europe. I remember when I got the plane to Poland, you could see the edge of Britain. You know, when you fly to Europe, and you can see out the window when the border of Europe is coming. And then you fly into Poland, you get the train to Kyiv, you can see the tree lines. It still looks like the British countryside. And that 7-hour drive to Kramatorsk, which is the Donbass, looked the same. And it's almost like I could remember the journey back home. And then suddenly you start seeing smokestacks, and suddenly we started driving into almost like towards Bakhmut, like a smog. It was like driving into Mordor. At night, it was like air raid sirens mixed with the sounds of wild dogs and wolves howling to match it, artillery going off and on in the distance. And it literally, and the smog was from the burning city of Bakhmut at the time, which was falling. And it was suddenly you're driving east and east and east into Europe, and then there's a line you can't cross because you'll be killed, whether you're a journalist or volunteer or anyone. And it felt real. It felt like watching a World War II film. And that's when I realized the first sleepless night that I had, that no reporting I had ever done before, whether it was about Brexit, propaganda, whatever it was as important as that, and capturing what we saw. And we spent the next few days just driving around Kramatorsk, driving between there and Chasiv Yar, super terrified. I remember telling Paul, please just turn the car around 5 or 6 times whenever I heard massive sounds of booms, and having him calm me down and say, Caolan, that was outgoing. That's different to incoming. And I didn't even know what that concept was. You know, outgoing is a sound that you hear in the air. It's basically your side firing something towards the Russians. Incoming is a sound of a thud, and you feel it through your boots. That's how John described it. And they would sort of calm me down by saying, it's going that way, it's okay.
And I remember on Under Deadly Skies, actually John Sweeney talking about exactly describing what you were saying there on the film.
Yeah, and we were thinking, what was interesting was it's very unusual for someone like me who's not been to somewhere like that to immediately go there and to react and to basically be surprised by all of those things, because we watch films that are made in those places, and we watch the end result, which is the heroic presenter standing on the top of a hill saying, this is Bakhmut that way, this is the front line there, this is what artillery is going off, and this is how many troops have died. But to actually show the experience of getting there and incoming and outgoing, the difference, really humanize what it is and how
someone's shitting themselves, you know,
yeah,
like that needs to be communicated.
Yeah, which is why I ended up putting it in the edit, because I actually thought that's really interesting, because it's the only way we can imagine ourselves as a viewer in America or Britain back home in a place like Ukraine is to do it through the perspective of someone that's never been here before, or a place like it. And I think that was interesting. But we spoke to soldiers who were saying, well, at night we saw something called lustra. It translates to chandelier. It's this glowing sparkle. It's quite beautiful almost, and it falls from the sky. And we investigated it. We looked for cartridges of it, and we took it to Hamish Gordon, who is a chemical weapons expert. And he said,
who contributes to Ukraine the Latest podcast for the Daily Telegraph, just to let people know. But yeah, carry on.
Amazing person. And he said, if you have found this, and we were on the phone to him in the car driving away from Kramatorsk, he said, you guys have found this in a village where there's no signs of military activity. That is a war crime. It's a crime against humanity. You need to capture this. You need to submit it to the ICC. And suddenly I realized that I'd gone from coming to Kyiv for a quick film in a stadium to actually finding evidence that I could submit of war crimes, which just was mind-blowing. And it shocked me that it hadn't really been done that much before. I was looking for evidence of this, and there hadn't been many reports of it, because it's hard to get to these places. It's expensive, and it's difficult to spend the time just to investigate. And one of the people we spoke to who saw the lustra said, we saw the same thing, our friends saw the same thing in a city called Kherson. While in the Donbass, I had never heard of the word Kherson. I didn't know what it was. I didn't know anything about this at this point. So we drive from there to Kherson, we get in, and just before we arrive, Zarina says, put on your flak jackets because the city is loud today. And I was thinking, this doesn't make any sense, because Kherson, from a distance driving in, looks like a cosmopolitan built-up area. It's got like skyscrapers, tall buildings, and high-rises. It looks like Manchester. In the Donbass, I was driving in, and it's fields and it's villages and towns, and it becomes more and more militarized the closer you get, and it's kind of like a classic style war zone, right? And then you get the fields where the fighting is. This is like a major city where the Russians are on the other side, and I couldn't get my head around this. And Paul turned around and he said, Caolan, it would be like if the Russians invaded London and they got pushed back to the South Thames, to the south of the river. They set up bank there, they set up artillery and drones, and they started firing artillery into London, into Big Ben, literally from the other side of the River Thames. And I couldn't comprehend it, because again, it's different being in a trench and having artillery going off, but being in a major city with tall buildings and skyscrapers and cafes functioning with 100,000 civilians being hit by artillery was alien to me. And it's on such an unusual place. And we got in there, and I remember just the constant booms everywhere. And just being like, what the hell is going on here? And it's a civilian city. This isn't again trench versus trench, town versus. This is a city filled with civilians, shop workers, people taking buses, being hit 300 times a day. And I remember the only thing that made me feel even slightly safe or normal there was Paul would say, well, if you imagine the artillery is coming in from the south of the river, all the buildings that face the river are the ones getting hit. The backs of the buildings are behind. So as soon as you're behind those buildings, you feel safe. And I was like, okay. So I just remember every single street you went to, running between the buildings and knowing that when I was on this side of the wall, that the Russians couldn't see me. And I remember at one point we drove down that main street you've got there on the map, where the P is in Kherson, XP, the main one there. We drove down, and suddenly the hill goes down, and I could see straight down, because it's kind of gridded like New York, the other side of the river. And I freaked out straight away. And Paul said, put your camera away. Don't point it, because if your lens reflects light, they'll think it's a sniper. They'll hit you straight away. They'll think you're pointing a sniper at them. This is just absolutely unreal mental things that you have to think about, right?
Just to interject, I was in Kherson last February, and that was at a time, so we had to go in, we blacked out the car, we even blacked out the instruments like the dashboard and everything, the computer like console thing, and turned off all the lights. And it was not so much because we would be struck or drones, but it's like drones looking over and seeing where you're going and seeing where the guest house is that might be a place where people congregate that could be important, and then they hit that. And so we like went in completely dark, went to the guest house. But I wouldn't go there now, because the whole human safari thing, it is just, even in that time, it was dangerous then. So my room was shaking with outgoing and incoming artillery at night. It was shaking. My windows were rattling, and it was pretty scary, right? And I got into my body armor, helmet, and everything, and we went in completely dark, and everything is shuttered up. Like everything's boarded up. There's, as you drive through, every window's basically got plyboard on it. And when we went to the supermarket on the outskirts of Kherson, like you wouldn't know it was there. And then the electric doors open as someone comes out, and then this brightness erupts, and you're like, oh, there's a supermarket, right? And then you go in and you buy your stuff, and then it was shut up, and the whole place is dark. But
I know that exact supermarket,
yeah, right next to a petrol station, which you can only see like a little green light on maybe one of the pumps. It's still operating petrol station, but it's completely dark. Now, that was February 2024. Now, I guess it's been completely changed even then. I mean, I wouldn't go there now. It's too dangerous for civilians. And the Russians are just playing like murder drones with old people and anyone they can see. So yeah, anyway, that's my personal anecdote.
Well, did you see the film I shot there recently, the Hunted in Kherson?
Yes. So that was, I remember reporting that when after you brought it out, or referencing that. Yeah,
I mean, that as a reference there, the artillery was the threat then, and I remember, like you said, it was the north side walls that protected you. I mean, I couldn't stay in that city. I was so unprepared at that time. I couldn't stay in Kherson for longer than 3 hours a day. We were staying in Mykolaiv at the time and driving back and forth, because every minute was like an hour. It was like this sick pit in my stomach feeling constantly. And it's like, it's weird, because I've always been I've always, whenever I had therapy or whenever I've, just thought about how to process the world, to follow your instincts and to follow your gut about life and about everything. And in situations like that, the point is to ignore that and to ignore every single physical reaction inside your body to physically what's going around you, and to cut yourself off from it and to stay focused. So that was just out of control, unreal. We interviewed torture victims. We went into this cellar. It was like something out of a gothic vampire movie. I mean, I've never seen anything like it, where it was this inhumane torture chamber that was set up by the Soviets that was so inhumane. When Ukraine gained its independence, they shut it down and boarded it up. When the Russians took Kherson, they opened it back up and threw regular people back inside. Civilians in Kherson who just happened to look at soldiers in the wrong way, who just happened to annoy them, or who had anything to do with the administration, and they tortured them in the most unimaginable way. And the way that the Russians had fled that city, I was only there a couple months after liberation, like everything was still in there. The gas masks that were used, there were cameras with still tapes in them with the evidence of it. There were still ropes everywhere. They had just fled, and so they had fled, and we
Wow.
were one of the first to see this crime scene. And I
Yeah,
remember
because
the
you
smell
feature
was
this.
thick.
You
Yeah.
feature this in Under Deadly Skies. So and by the way, please, guys, I watched this through Bylines TV and paid Byline TV to watch this, because it's a good organization. You can see it in a number of different ways, but I just advise, putting the money straight to Byline TV. So go to Byline TV /Putin documentary and watch John Sweeney and Caolan, experience exactly what he's discussing. Sorry, carry on.
No, yeah, and I remember just the smell. It's like this thick soup of evil. It was like smoggy, wet, damp, with like human. I mean, it is like unlike anything I'd ever seen. And again, I didn't even know this existed, and I had done some prior research on Kherson, and it felt like we were one of the first people to document this. And we found torture victims in Kherson, convinced them to go back to where they were tortured for the first time, so we could gather evidence firsthand of recounting viscerally what they experienced. And I remember we interviewed Alexander, who was tortured, and he walked down the hallway all the way through the cells that he was tortured in to try and find the cell that he was tortured in. He walked into the main one, and he saw his name carved in the wall and broke down. And the sound of artillery in the background. I'd never seen anything like this, but it just felt, the only thing that kept me there was this, knowing that in that SD card in the camera was something extremely valuable. I didn't even know about it, and I wanted everyone else to hear it too. When you capture things like this, it's like hearing a bad rumor. The only way to process it is by telling somebody else. You feel slightly better about letting someone else know. It was like doing that on a bigger scale,
A couple of personal questions then for you, Caolan. Have you reached a point in your life where you think, and rightly so, that you're experiencing freaking important stuff, and therefore, you've just expressed this sense that I need to let the world know about this? But is it giving you a sense of much greater purpose to your life now than maybe you'd had previously? And I know you were previously reporting, and that would have been a case of giving yourself a sense of importance as well in delivering this breaking news in whatever context it was. But now in the context of maybe war and the complete depravity that you have experienced, and the threat and the seriousness of this to global geopolitics, do you have a sense of increased purpose?
Yeah, I think in those moments, I mean, the second I saw the evidence of white phosphorus, the second I saw Alex break down in that cell, there was no going back from that. Like, I remember I wanted to go back to London, go back home to Ireland, and just get away from everything, and maybe get back to reporting at one point, because I'd found it so stressful the nights in Mykolaiv, really not wanting to go back at some moments. But I think I realized that it's almost like in Lord of the Rings, when, if you read the actual book, the Shire is burned and scorned as soon as they set foot in Mordor, because the analogy is, once you've experienced and gone on a journey like that, home is never the same place. And that's what happened when I got back to London. I spent 6 months editing this documentary, and I couldn't actually return to normal reporting. That's why I left Byline full time as well, in a lot of ways. I mean, I'm still doing reports with them. I'm still doing submitting stuff with them. I do a lot of work, but I don't run it full time anymore, because my head stayed in Ukraine and home disappeared. during all of those times. There just didn't exist. I would go to cocktail parties. I would go out in Soho. I'd go and see my old friends, and I couldn't engage in the same conversations I was having. Drama in London. What's next for media? What's next for the Labour Conservatives? Everything just sounded mute. And so yeah.
Well, so the second part to my question was going to be, are you also, although you've talked about how you're afraid in Mykolaiv to maybe go back to Kherson or whatnot, is there an element of the excitement of this? Because I think about people like Paul Conran, who his life is going to incredibly dangerous places and reporting on it as a photojournalist. Like, do you have a sense of also there's an exhilaration, a dangerous pull to these places and to doing the work you are doing?
No, I don't like it. I mean, I've met a lot of journalists who run off that. They get a kind of a thrill in a lot of ways, and that's fine. If that means that they go to those places and they gather evidence and good reports, fine. I don't care what the reasons are. But I don't like going to these places. Like, going to Kursk was absolutely horrendous, terrifying. It wasn't this cool thing. Going to the east, and I am going back to Kherson in a few weeks. I hate it. It's like there's no sleep. It's like the pit in my stomach constantly. And the longer I spend in those places, the longer it takes to recover. I always find for a week it takes in Kherson, it takes me a week, if not more, to be able to even edit it when I come back. And, you know, honestly, when I got back from Kursk and I went to the Donbass on my last trip, I was literally drinking every day for a week. That was my way of coping with it. And then I had to stop myself. I was like, now I'm sober completely. I don't drink at all, but I was just like absolutely mentally effed. And I don't like it, but there aren't people there reporting it enough. When I went back to Kherson, I was one of the only journalists there really doing an in-depth film into the human safari. And in the weeks after my film got 2 million views, the mainstream media sent, the Wall Street Journal was there was loads of other organizations there, and the people that I had interviewed in my film, the World Aid Runners, said that those reporters specifically had referenced my film. They said that we'd seen a documentary called Hunted in Kherson, and they'd seen it trend because it was trending #1. So it pushed the mainstream media to report on Kherson, so it was worth it. And it feels good to do that, but I hate going to those places. I can't sleep, and I think it's genuinely bad for your mental health.
Sarah asks, could you ask Caolan how does he manage to maintain good mental health after seeing so much destruction and misery, and also threat to yourself as well?
I mean, try my best to surround myself around good people in Kyiv. I'm dating someone in Kyiv now who's really lovely. There's a girl called Audrey who I went to Syria with that lives on this street as well, who's grounded in reality.
Is that Audrey from United 24 or a different Audrey?
Yeah, from Nashville. She's really good. And
I'm going to be interviewing her soon. But anyway, carry on.
Oh, good. I just have a small network of people that are grounded in reality and that are good. And, you know, one thing I really made a big mistake with when I first came here was surrounding myself just with soldiers and people and volunteers who are in it all the time and who are traumatized all the time. And that can be a spiral. That can make it feel like the entire world is just over all the time.
Yeah.
And it's too omnipresent. And I've realized that I need to have a sense of normality and separation here. And for the first time, I just went to Ireland. I just went on a break and spent 7 days in a cottage with a fire by the roaring wild Atlantic Sea on the Wild Atlantic Way in Western Ireland to reset and go to. And I went to pubs where you know, there was live music and Irish music playing and people laughing and drinking Guinness and just joking with everyone. I was playing board games. I wasn't talking about the war. And I came back here now with a new sense of calm and happiness and positivity. But John said that the reason he's not here in Ukraine full time and he goes back to London is because he said, Caolan, you have to have one foot in the real world because you will lose your mind if you don't. And one of the reasons that I can talk about how shocking the crap that is happening in this country is because my reference is, as a normal person, this isn't normal. This is crazy. The human safari is crazy. Whereas a lot of journalists or volunteers that have experienced this and lived here full time are not surprised by it. And they don't see it as surprising. They're like, oh, you know, I meet journalists at the front line and there's a massive thing goes off. And they go, well, yeah, what do you expect? It's Russia. And I go, no, what you expect is Russia. This is crazy. This is happening in Europe. This is not how it should be. And that's why the reports do quite well. But that requires being grounded in like Britain and Ireland and normal reality and having normal friends to experience these things as an outsider that isn't sort of war
Yeah,
ingrained.
that's so important, because that goes back to what you're saying about Under Deadly Skies, which is experiencing that as a newbie, if you like. So
Yeah.
because it's about empathy with your audience. So if your audience uh, can't see them put themselves in your shoes, that intersubjectivity, you know, if you're an experienced war reporter, then I'm watching this as a rando back in the UK or America or wherever, then like you're living a different life than I'm living. But if you're Caolan Robertson, who's just kind of fresh faced and got one foot in London, just back from London, oh my goodness, I've experienced this, and I'm living your experiences through your own, you know, vicariously through you. And then and then to say, so you need to keep that fresh for your audience by keeping a foot back in there, not normalizing the destruction and horrors of Ukraine, and then reliving it anew, sadly enough, as often as possible, in order to communicate that to your audience.
You've literally put it, and I haven't really thought about it in this much detail, but that is what's happening, because a lot of the war correspondents, again, that live here are hard and tough. A lot of them are ex-military, you know, and it's really about being like, yeah, I'm not fazed by anything. And it's like, great, that means you can film what's going on. But most people would be fazed by this. And the experience that I had in Kherson, and I think the reason Kherson was so big and got all those views was because it was me with a phone sitting there being like, there are constant explosions, like reacting to it in fear, genuinely, and just filming the experience.
It's not
And that
performative.
is unusual.
No. Yeah, because I remember when you were reporting when were you in Odessa? Was it Odessa? When the Greek prime minister was there, or was it it was when Starmer. No, it was when Starmer was in. Oh, when was it? Where there were it was in Kyiv, actually. You were in Kyiv,
Yeah.
and they were actually trying to attack during a time when Zelensky was meeting with someone. Do you remember?
Yeah, this was 2 foot in front of me. I filmed that video. Yeah, this was here. They yeah, this was crazy. And I was like, what the hell is going on? I mean, you could see Kyrgyzstan here. I just live next to Square, and you could see the entourage. You could see all these kind of new kind of media people and his team that had never really been to Ukraine before. And I was interested in kind of how they would respond to it, because I know a few of them. And then suddenly there's like massive air defense. So my friend is standing outside the intercom when this is happening, and she called me and she goes, Caolan, I've never seen panic like this in Kyiv. Like, everyone's running into the intercom really scared. Like, and I was like, yeah, because suddenly you have a group of people who are like the kind of prime minister's comms team, not war correspondents, hearing explosions in the sky. So it's, you know, that is shocking. But the journalists that were here were like, yeah, air defense. And I was like, no, not air defense. This is crazy. Like, there is a drone hovering above you know, the UK Prime Minister, and there is massive explosions. This is not normal. And I think that's why that video did well too. I wasn't exaggerating. I was like, genuinely, this is crazy, and this is why they were running around. And it wasn't really reported for what it was. You know, when an air defense goes off, a lot of stuff falls from the sky. There's a lot of hot stuff that lands and crashes, cracked windows all over the place here. That could have killed someone in his team or him. I mean, it's super serious. So but yeah, that kind of relates to what that is.
When I was in Kyiv just recently, a few weeks back, where we met at a there was a gig that was raising money. That was one of the times we met. We also met when Jonathan Fink was giving a talk with a Ukrainian philosopher. But but anyway, that's by the by. I made our team stay in Hotel Ukraine, which is on the Maidan, which overlooks. It's that big old Soviet hotel that overlooks Maidan, and even though it's actually a bit of a crappy hotel inside, it really needs a good lot of investment. But it's like a Soviet style hotel, and because it overlooks the central square, and it has its own air raid siren and air raid announcements. Whenever there are air raids, you know about it. You're woken up big time. And what I wanted the guys that came with me to deliver the vehicles, who hadn't been to Kyiv before, I wanted them to experience the kind of visceral reality of what happens during an air raid, and actually being woken up and having loudness around you, and like being scared a bit, even though ostensibly you're quite safe in the center of Kyiv to some degree. But you know, you see the searchlights going off, and one of the nights there was some anti-aircraft fire going on as well as the air raid sirens, and it's like, yeah, so we experienced that, and then we went to Dreams Hostel or whatever, and you know, experienced a different experience. But you know, I think if you are like you were saying about Starmer's entourage, if you're visiting Kyiv, and I think they know that, the Ukrainians know that, and so when there are air raid sirens of like famous with famous politicians there, like that's good. That's like, this is the reality of life in Kyiv, and you need to experience that so you can take back that fear back to your country and explain to your populations what's going on and act accordingly.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I meet people all the time that get here for the first time who run inside, when they hear air raid sirens, and who didn't really feel or know the extent of the war. And I think it's a helpful thing. But again, it's nothing compared to going to the east and hearing, incoming and outgoing. It's nothing worse than like compared to that. I mean, my threshold has gone way down now. I mean, air alerts go on, things go off. I don't get that physical fright anymore. Not that's something that I've become sensitized to, which is helpful. Actually, it helps in war zones to be able to hold a camera steady, right? So that's like a good thing. But I think to finish on the Kherson stuff, I think the craziest difference was just how much things have changed. When we were in Kherson in 2023, the threat was artillery coming in like that, and you could protect yourself by having an office or by standing somewhere north of the city. In June last year, the Russians pulled out a map and they drew the entire city of Kherson as the red zone. The red zone means everyone is off limits. And they started using drones to hunt everyone alive. And I remember reading reports that they were getting initiatives to do this for cash, right? It was like $50 for a car, $20 if you hit someone wearing like a coat or something like this. It was all these different initiatives for killing civilians and killing aid workers. And I remember just thinking, this is like Kherson in 2020 times a million, because there is nowhere to hide. Even in my apartment, which was right in the center, they can fly a drone into your window and they can send another one straight back inside. And it's like being naked in a way I've never experienced. And in that film, I was on the phone to my mom like a moron, because again, like, people criticize me for this film, but I stand by this criticism, because I went there on my own on a bus because Zarina said they're hunting civilians here. And I didn't know just how serious it was. And I didn't know that the Russians could like intercept UK SIM cards and things like this, right? I'm completely in Ukraine funded just by like 100 people on Patreon. I don't have like teams, security, nothing like this. It's just me and a camera. So get on a bus there, which by the way, no one does. That bus leaves at 4 p.m. There's no buses coming back out. You're stuck in the city. You're trapped in the city. And the drones can find you anywhere. And when that drone was hovering above my head, after I was on the phone to my mum, they'd obviously intercepted the phone signals I was giving as a UK SIM card. It was like the feeling of knowing that someone is looking at you just a few meters above your head and is trying to drop something to blow you up is unlike anything I've ever felt in my whole life. It's like a new type of just cyber fear of just like futurism, evil futurism. I don't know, dehumanization in war. At least in traditional war, you're pointing a gun, who you're pointing it at. There's an enemy on the other side. And before you pull that trigger, this is like someone with a computer and goggles at the other side of the river, not knowing who I am, about to hit drop. Like, there's nothing like that I can describe, and that is mental.
Have you ever come across Tochny and Brendan Kelly? So Brendan Kelly, Tochny is a group of people that do data. That Andrew Perpetua puts maps together of Ukraine, of the war, that they're totally as accurate as, I think better than Deep State to some degree. And they also do work in looking at visually confirmed losses. And also one of the data analyses they have done, if you look at their posts, Brendan Kelly has done a number of different articles on the attacks in Kherson, and that red zone you talked about. They were trawling the Telegram channels from Russians to actually get that evidence, and they were the ones, as far as I understand, that put together that understanding of what was going on. So preying on the innocent, drone pilots circle like vultures over Kherson's most vulnerable. The Hounds of Zed is a really good one. These are really, really good articles that particularly Brendan, if you're interested in what's going on in Kherson, that Brendan has put together, and including with all the data analysis of how who's doing it, what they're doing, and what the effect it's having. So it really, really incredible work. If I just click on this one, this is, you can look at the ages of drone casualties.
This is amazing.
I thought you would have known about this because your circles of content really freaking overlap here. So Brendan Kelly is someone you really want to get in touch with about this. So drone casualty running totals, looking at geolocation, looking at the methodology that these drone pilots have for taking out people, and then understand that here's exactly turning the red zone blue. So that's the red zone, anyway, loads and loads of stuff that you'd be absolutely freaking fascinated in, and then looking at what they're doing and why they're doing it, and the theories that the theories, and also the evidence from translating a lot of these Russian Telegram channels that are the people actually doing this. So it's training, it's terrorism, it's psychopathy, it's all these things. So some of these units, then you can see them get taken away and put on in the Donbass, and actually they're training in Kherson by killing civilians, and how to follow a vehicle, and then it stops at a traffic light, and you're getting a sense of how to operate your drones in that environment, and then you can supplant it over to there. So anyway, I'll send you Brendan's details, because it'd be fascinating.
Yeah, do send that, because again, I'm just planning my follow-up trip now, because at the end of Hunted in Kherson was about how nature is the last stand of defense for civilians in Kherson, and it's the leaves on the trees. And civilians told me there, it's like they said,
but they're dropping petal drones. But they're dropping petal drones that look like the leaves as well. But anyway, sorry.
Yeah, it's just absolutely insane. Well, no, and they said we wait for the wind to start or the rain to start before we go out and get our shopping. And I thought, geez, in London, we wait for the rain to stop and the wind to stop before we go out. In Kherson, they wait for it to start, because Mother Nature is the only defense to this. And the leaves on the trees is what we're protecting everyone. I mean, I went between each tree cover to get away from that drone, and it worked. And now I'm looking outside right now in Ukraine. There are no leaves on the trees. And apparently, I've just had some calls from Kherson in the last few days. It has become significantly worse. There's nowhere to hide. And so I'm going to do a follow-up film called When the Leaves Fell. And because this is the first time for Kherson. This is the first. So there hasn't been a winter without leaves with this drone threat. So this is new. And I want to see how that's affecting people there. But this site is super helpful for looking. But yeah, I mean, there's nothing... it's very unusual, and I think Kherson is going to be ground zero for a city that's looked back on for decades to come as when drone warfare really was ignited in the brutal way it has been. It's not just in trenches again; it's like against a civilian city population, and I don't know how people survive there. I mean, really, it's just unbelievable. To go through that every day. And the people in the film I spoke to, this was what, one of the times I get so depressed in Ukraine or so out of energy is I remember that the woman at the end of this film was saying, every single time they hit us with a drone, every single time they drop a bomb in Kherson, it makes us stronger, and it makes me hate Putin more. This was like a 90-year-old woman who had just relearned Ukrainian to tell me this. And if people in this country, you can kind of feel it all around you, have this like constant drive to survive. It's addictive. You can feel it all around you, to innovate new drone technology. People that are working events are now creating drone warehouses all around me, and they just all have this unity and drive. And it's like, okay, if I'm depressed or bored one day because I can't get editing done, you can feel that around you, and it's kind of motivating.
Here we are, an hour, or no, 50 minutes into talking, and I haven't even got to my question number one, really.
Oh, yeah.
Which is brilliant. I mean, I love these free-flowing conversations, and that's how it should be. Just before we actually get on to talking about the kind of peace, because I think this is actually more meaningful for people, the real experiences you are having inside Ukraine. Like, we can talk about analyzing the peace process or the peace plans in the US, and that, anyone could talk about that, I guess. Although I want to talk to you about what Ukrainians might be thinking. But before we get to that, you went to, I mean, when I go for a New Year's celebration, I think about, I could go to all these lovely places. I can maybe hop on a plane and end up in, I don't know, Prague for New. You went to Syria for the New Year. Yes. What was going on there?
Well, I woke up. I didn't do something. I just need to remember where I was. So I think it was late November. The story started to break about the rebels making advances in Syria against the Assad regime. I didn't know that much about Assad except for through Paul Conroy that we talked about earlier, who had told me that it was this dictator in the Middle East who was basically committing all these horrendous war crimes against his own civilians. And I remember John telling me that there was a huge connection when we were in the tunnels of Kherson between the torture that he had seen with the gas masks by the Russians and the torture that he had seen in Syria under Assad, backed by Russia. And he was like, this is from the top of the Kremlin. It's an evil exported around the world. And it was to do with the film we were going to make called The Elephant, which is symbolism of this gas mask. That's what they call it, the type of torture developed by the Russian army and how it's the tentacles of evil around the world. And I thought, if Assad actually falls, and I turned around to Audrey at the time, the United 24 journalist, we were in the back of a taxi on the way to a party, then we should go to Syria, because there's going to be like 50 years of silent cover-ups that Russia backed, that Russia also tried to cover up, that we can expose and we can link to our reporting in Ukraine. And it could be like an amazing opportunity. And she was like, yeah, let's do it. And Assad fell, which was actually still pretty shocking. And I remember I walked out on the square here in the snow and the church bells were ringing really, really loudly. And I made a quick video and said, the church bells are ringing behind me, which is symbolic because it feels like, this is a huge humiliation for Putin. He's not, he hasn't been able to take Kyiv. He's lost his major military base in the Middle East. This is a terrible day for Russia, and it's a great day for Ukraine. And that had 3 million views. It was like the most viewed tweet I'd ever put out, and people really resonated with it. And I thought, God, that's interesting. People are really interested in content about this and hearing the Russian perspective, because not enough people were talking about it. Like, if you looked at the media at the time, it was a little bit about Russia, but it was mainly about Assad and his failures, and it was mainly about his legacy. But I was like, guys, Assad is in Moscow. Why is Assad in Moscow? Why didn't Assad go to Dubai? So, why didn't he go to where his wife lives? And he went to Moscow because this is Russia linked. So I said, I want to go to Syria, and I want to talk explicitly, exclusively about Russia's involvement, what they tried to cover up and what they did. And I wanted to focus on that 2018 chemical attack, because that was one of those big misinformation propaganda tools that was used by the far left and the far right that the Kremlin pumped out. And there were always suspicions about it. This was in Duma in 2018, 56 civilians killed by barrels dropped of illegal gas onto a residential street in North Damascus. And Audrey and I have not been to conflicts on that side of Ukraine. I'd never been to the Middle East. So this was, first time Middle East, it's doing it on extreme mode, right?
Yeah.
And so we call our friends in Damascus, and we were like, reporters and stuff, we're like, how do you get in? And they were like, well, we came in Channel 4, in an entourage through Jordan, through this and this. We don't know how it'll be for you. What is your security? What's your team? And I said, well, we were thinking of getting a taxi from Beirut airport to Damascus. And they were like, cool, who's your team? I was like, no, it's just me and Audrey. They're like, what? Don't come to Syria. And I was like, no, it's fine. They said, Caolan, the prisons haven't just been emptied of political prisoners. The prisons have all been emptied. Hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people, all criminals as well, have been emptied onto the streets. There are no police currently in Syria because the government fell and anyone associated with it is gone. So all the prisons are empty. There's no police. Oh, and by the way, it's Syria. So I was like, oh, I think we can do it. So me and Audrey come to this apartment about a week before New Year's, and we open a bottle of wine and we say, let's just book it. And we go on Skyscanner and we're looking at all these different flights. Obviously, there's no flying over Syria. So we find the best way to Beirut, book the flight, and call local taxi companies. We called a guy that knows a fixer there, and we just said, let's just do it. Let's just go. Let's just see what happens. Which was kind of wild, but I had this like massive instinct feeling that I just needed to go there. I had all those views talking about it. No one was talking about Russia, and I just felt like I needed to go. And we get the train to Vienna, the usual massive trip, get on a plane to Istanbul, go from Istanbul to Beirut. And as we get closer, it's like the news in Istanbul airport lounge was like more and more about Assad. It was more and more about the Middle East. We get to Beirut and everyone's talking about Assad. You can feel it getting closer. And we go into this taxi and we cross over these snowy mountains to get into Syria. I didn't know it was snow. You have to get snowy mountains to get to Syria. It was like going through Narnia or something, through another universe. It's bizarre. And, this driver is saying, oh, I don't know why you're going to Syria right now. This is mad. And also, you can't drive a Lebanon car into Syria. You can't drive a Syrian car into Lebanon. So we were like, oh, for God's sake. So we have to like get off at the border and then just walk for ages through this no man's land of like, after we leave Beirut, they're just like, they like stamped our passport in Lebanon. They're like, good luck, we don't even know where you're going. And we, there's all these posters of Assad writ down everywhere. And this is New Year's Eve. And we really want to get to Damascus for New Year's Eve because I wanted to make a video saying, Syria has been liberated from Russian influence for the first time in decades. And in 2026 for New Year's Eve, I want to be standing in the center of Kyiv with fireworks the same way, celebrating Ukraine's liberation from Russia. It's possible one day. Dictators can fall and good things happen when they do, and we should stop being so afraid of it. I wanted to make that point. So we're like, we get to the blown out checkpoint. There's like no one there. It's chaos because all the government workers fled, right? Because they worked for Assad. So there's no one to man the checkpoint. So there's like kind of a makeshift militia there. They're like scanning documents. Suddenly they say no one can come in. There's all these cars. There's thousands of cars driving in with like everything they own from Lebanon and from the rest of the Middle East, all trying to get through as well, trying to get to Damascus for New Year's, trying to return home because it's safe for the first time. And then fights start breaking out. There's like absolute mayhem. We just end up giving loads of cash to one of the border people and we just drive straight through. No stamp on the passport. Just absolutely ridiculous. So there's 4 hours to go until New Year's Eve. So we get into like another local taxi, a Syrian one, drives us into Damascus. And we have like 2 hours to go before New Year's. And I'm like, oh my God, we're going to make it. We're going to be able to do this video. And the one that you're showing me there, we finally get to the city center. And I literally I'm going through all these crowds of people. There are guys with ISIS badges on their patches. Audrey has no time to like hide her hair. So she's like, what's the situation here? How do we behave? How do we act? But everyone was just kind of jubilated. It was kind of a good environment. It was very, very strange. And I remember the AK-47 started to be fired into the air. Gunshots started to go off. Fireworks started. And I climb onto this ex-police Assad police force car with all the windows smashed and just get out my phone and film that video you've just shown and said, the celebrations in the streets of Damascus, newly liberated Syria. And I started asking people what they thought about Ukraine. And they were like, we didn't hear about Ukraine before, but now Ukraine's the best. Ukraine's the best because they know what Russian evil is. And Ukraine had just sent them grain. So they were all like happy to be there for Ukraine. It was an incredible moment. And that video got, 800K and people really liked, it was a great message. And then I woke up the next morning, the adrenaline wore off and I was like, why the hell am I in Syria? Like, when you go on holiday for the first time and you wake up and you don't know where you are, you're like, what bed is this? I'm like, so that was not great. And then
I'm a gay guy in Syria, and goodness knows what's going on there. I've got a blonde woman with me from United 24, American, that's probably not equipped to be in Syria as well. Like this is okay. It's a bit nuts now.
Yeah, no, pretty much. And then I went up to Audrey's room and I was like, what are we doing here? And she was like, I don't know. Like, this was just all a rush. Like, we didn't really properly think. So the fixer that we met, Ali, was like, guys, look, the problem is there are still Russians everywhere here, right? That we didn't have a proper time to. There are still Russians all over the place. But the main threat to you guys is that there are Assad loyalist people that were complicit in the crimes that Assad carried out, the crimes that you're investigating, that don't want them to come out. And those are the people that can come after you. So we need to change hotels every day. We need to be moving around this and this and this. And I said, great, but take us to Duma. We want to go to Duma and we want to find these victims. So he takes us to the street where this happened. And we have to get through 4 different checkpoints between Damascus and Duma, which is about an hour drive, that were all abandoned. And I said, why would there be checkpoints between, this is like checkpoints between London and Luton. Like, why would there be checkpoints? And they said, Caolan, I don't think you realize how prison-like Syria was to control information. You couldn't go from town to town unless you had official business. People from Duma couldn't go to Damascus. People from Damascus couldn't go to the other suburbs. Everyone was contained to control information. Internet was blocked. You'd be thrown in prison if you were trading dollars. It was a prison. So we go through these checkpoints. And I realized that we're one of the first people to go to this place, not just from Damascus, but from America and as Western journalists. And people are shocked to see us in this town. This is a conservative Islamic town. It's very, it's not like Damascus. Damascus is quite liberal. This is a very traditional part of Damascus. And it's a little bit more threatening, especially if you look like Audrey. People are really giving looks. It was quite scary. But we arrive at the street where the attack happened, and immediately this guy comes steaming out, and he's like shouting at the car. He's like, "Journalists, journalists, journalists, go away, go away, go away." And I'm getting really scared. And the fixer says, "Caolan, it's fine. We'll calm him down. He just doesn't like journalists." And I was like, why doesn't he like journalists? And then he calms him down. He takes us into his house. He shows us his phone. He's lost his wife and 3 daughters in that gas attack. And he said, I'm sorry for overreacting. When the guys told me you're Americans and British, I couldn't believe my ears. The only journalists that have come here were Russian journalists, Russia Today. And they took me to like a camp and forced me to lie, forced me to give false statements, filmed me endlessly saying my wife never even existed, my children never even existed, and I had never seen the gas attack. And that's why he hates journalists. And then he just started crying and outpouring, telling us all of this, and then he called everyone he knew, the people that testified at the Hague, the people that said that the gas attack never happened, 7 of the other witnesses who had either lost people, been doctors, or involved in it, who had given those statements to Russia Today, congregated them all in the street, and every single one of them gave us witness testimony saying they were flown to Moscow, interrogated by Russian authorities, then flown to The Hague, forced to write false statements, forced to lie, said that they would kill them or kill their family members if they ever deviated from this, or told them what they just told us. And we were like, this is one of the biggest stories ever. The Pentagon had accused Assad of perhaps doing this, but no one could really get evidence.
And yet Tulsi Gabbard is now in charge of is now director of national intelligence, and she sucked up all of that Russian propaganda. She believed it all. She went and visited Assad unilaterally. It's just absolutely insane what's going on.
It was insane. And it was terrifying for them to tell us this, because we sat down with one of the main people who was at The Hague, who was one of the doctors, and he said, the next day, he said, I could be killed for telling you this. And we said, okay, well, we can do everything we can to try and, conceal your identity. And said, no, I don't want my identity concealed. I want it for me to say it, and I want the world to see me saying it, because it was my face they used in their propaganda. And I want the world to know that Russia did this to us. It wasn't even our own people. They were more angry at Russia because they said at least Assad, it was a civilian, they saw it as a bit of a civilian conflict. It was different sects of Islam, but it was their own people in a civil war. They saw Russia coming in as a hostile neighborhood and bombing their own people, backed by Assad, and they found that even more egregious. So they hate Russia. It's one thing that's very similar to Ukraine. Both countries are nice to be in because they hate Russians. And I asked every single one of these people who testified, one of them was a teenager, to us, why did you tell us this? And they said, because truth matters, because people need to know what happened here. And I compared it to the testimony of Alexander, who told me in the tunnels of Kherson how he was tortured and how he wanted the world to know what happened here. And it felt like suddenly Russia isn't just this evil in Ukraine, it's evil everywhere on the planet. I'm hearing this in the dusty desert towns of the Middle East, the same testimonies I'm hearing in the Donbass.
And that's why it's all the more galling that and sorry to make this overtly political, but when you hear Trump, Vance, Hegseth, none of them as representatives of the United States, as the most powerful people in the world, none of them criticize Russia. None of them have once held Russia culpable for the things that you talk about. There's no, say what you like about the Biden administration, but Biden said he's a murderous dictator, he's a pure thug, right? That is absolute. That's what I want to hear, which is a clear moral evaluation of who these people are. And yet we are not getting that from the United States at the moment. And I think that is absolutely egregious.
It's despicable because there is categorical evidence. I mean, the United States, the UN sent a delegation in 2018. They were fired upon by Assad forces and forced to leave. But the United States knew what Russia was doing. They know what Russia is doing. And now they're basically shaking Putin's hand and congratulating him for all of this and saying, you can continue doing this. You're being rewarded for what you did in Ukraine. You're being rewarded for what you did in Syria. And we're actually going to start our negotiations talking to you. It's just absolutely sick. It's like selling not just the West down the river, but it's selling humanity down the river. It's completely evil. It's incomprehensible, especially when you see this stuff firsthand as well, and you hear stories of people who had to watch. Like the doctor that I interviewed said that he had to, sorry, the first man that I interviewed, he described in this documentary I'm bringing out as running to the back of his house. His 3 daughters were in his arm. His wife had already died in the front room, and he was holding them from the gas, and he watched them all take their last breath. And this is what Russia is. And for America to knowingly cover it up for Tulsi Gabbard, to shill for Assad, when all of them know about these atrocities, is difficult to contain, especially when I heard it from his mouth. And especially when you hear these stories more and more, it's hard not to become hysterical. And then actually no one will take me seriously if I start losing my mind with this. So I'll just rant about it later. But I mean, geez, it's like, it's just so evil. But this is why we went there. This is why we documented it. We called up Hamish, Gibret and Gordon as soon as we got these interviews. And we said, Hamish, you were in charge of NATO's chemical weapons response during the 2018 chemical attack. How damning is this information? And he said, Caolan, if you have found evidence and flight logs like you have, that they were flown to Russia before The Hague, that they were interrogated, you've got these testimonies, this will be used to reopen the case, and this could expedite these people out of Syria and have them retestify at The Hague. And he was like, this is invaluable evidence, and what you have found with Audrey is what we have tried to get out since 2018.
And yet you guys just rocked up like across the board without no disrespect to you, but this is total respect to you, which is like, yeah, we got some vague plans of doing this. We're going to take a real risk. We're going to rock across the border, and we don't really know how we're going to do this. And yet there you are, and because you are there, these people are freely giving you that damning evidence that is so valuable. That's just insane.
I didn't expect anything like that. Honestly, I thought the biggest thing we would do there was that video talking about New Year's and how great it is that Syria is liberated from Russia and Ukraine should be next. That was what I thought we were going to be doing. And then maybe talking about Duma, but not, we didn't expect to find anything like that. And Audrey and I went back to the hotel that night and we were like, this is insane. And we were Googling, and there was no other reports from anyone else in our videos that we could find anywhere. We were supposed to be there for 3 days, and we canceled the return flight. We stayed for a week, and we said we're just going to stay here until the story plays out, until we found every single witness. We went back to do that every single day. This hasn't been released yet. It's in a documentary I'm still editing. And we left early, actually, because the last person we spoke to was the 3rd doctor who was treating babies who was forced to lie at The Hague. And about 15 minutes after our interview with him at his surgery, he called up Ali, our fixer, and he said, I've just received 2 threatening phone calls, speaking from me with a Russian accent saying, we're going to find you, don't ever give an interview again. The Russians knew that we were there, me and Audrey.
Wow.
And they directly threatened him. And he said, I don't want my face in this film. I don't want anything in this film. And we captured all of this. We recorded the phone call. We recorded the follow-up. We've got evidence of all of it. And we decided to leave Syria early. I didn't sleep that night. I had my chair up against the door of the hotel room. I was expecting at any point someone to come in and just take us out. And so what we decided to do was we got our key findings, the 3 most critical interviews, and we decided to upload them live that night to Twitter. It got about 200,000 views, just the testimonies in a 10-minute video, because we said, if anything happens to us, and we said this at the start of the video, if we get our footage seized, if something happens to us, we have to get this footage out of Syria. And there wasn't the bandwidth to upload the raw stuff to a cloud. So we just put it out there, which made it so much riskier as well, because suddenly, like, we're there putting it out, which we've been told not to do. So we uploaded it, didn't sleep, got a taxi out of Syria the next day. You know what was kind of weird was everyone that I met was pretty amazing in Damascus. They were people who had different political sects, different sects of Islam, some Christians, 2 Jewish people. And the one thing that united them all was that they were free to breathe again, that they could speak again for 56 years.
Yeah.
Every generation grew up under this dictatorship where they couldn't breathe, they couldn't speak, and now they could again. And it was chaos. You know, it's not just the government police that were fleeing, it was the traffic wardens. The traffic was crazy because they were government employees, so there's no traffic lights in Damascus. It was traffic wardens, and there's no waste management, so there was just piles of waste at the side of every street. But things just worked, and people were happier. And there were fruit that was banned before in Syria with import taxes. There was bananas that you couldn't have gotten in from certain regions, and the markets were full of life again. And there was a mountain that the sun set on the last night that we were there, which was Assad's mountain, and the entirety of it was closed off to the public. and it was just this ominous place. And we drove up to the top of it, and it was full of people having barbecue, celebrating, dancing, looking out over the streets of their country, their capital. And I remember asking one of the civilians there in Syria, how does it feel looking out over Damascus free for the first time? And they said, we felt like tourists in our own country before under Assad. We felt like we couldn't even visit our own public parks. And now we're looking over our Damascus, our Syria, which was beautiful, sorry. And then we, and then we left the checkpoint. It's just, the people are fucking incredible there. And we got across the border, and suddenly we got to the checkpoint and everything was perfect. And we get into this checkpoint, and there's all these new employees at the checkpoint, stamping passports, checking IDs. And in those 10 days we were gone, they had completely reestablished order, and they had an official process. And I remember seeing buckets of white paint everywhere. And in the old checkpoint, there was Assad posters everywhere. It was kind of a dark mustard green. And suddenly it was all white. And I suddenly remember the smell of fresh paint as we left Syria. And they were like, why is there no stamp on your passport? I was like, you guys don't know how it was last week.
That's beautifully symbolic, though. That's beautifully symbolic. Like, that's such a powerful metaphor, isn't it? That as you leave, just in those 10 days, as you leave Syria, the smell of fresh paint. This is a fresh start. This is a new Syria that is emerging. Let's paint over the past in order to start a new future afresh. That's absolutely wonderful.
That's what it was. I remember it was, when the fresh paint sticks in your nose as well, right at the top. It takes a few hours to go. It was driving away back over the snowy mountain. It felt like it wasn't a real place, but it was just all this horror, all these bravery of people telling the truth, dancing at night, everything we experienced, and then just leaving with the smell of fresh paint and hope for a new Syria that can survive. It was just...
And let's hope. I mean, because there's so much that can still go wrong, of course, and the Russians still haven't been fully kind of ejected. I think there are issues with sanctions remaining on Syria from the West, which then allows Russia to elbow itself back into Syria. And then, I think the foreign minister's married to a Russian, and there are certainly some challenges there. Of course, there are.
Yeah, it's difficult. There's still Russian influence there. When we were in the press office, I was trying to meet with HTS, with the government, and they gave me permission, but then they all went on a trip to Saudi Arabia to do a conference. But there was a woman who was walking through the halls of this kind of administrative building, and my friend translated, was one of the big Russia television hosts, like one of the most famous ones, like really evil kind of propagandists. And she just sits down next to us, and me and Audrey just start laughing and joking out loud about going to Kherson and how much of a shithole it was. And she was just getting so angry. And I was like, there's nothing they can do.
That is so cool.
It was really funny.
Love it. Love it.
Yeah.
Well, okay. So let's, as we kind of meander towards, something of a conclusion at some point, I want to talk to you about what the Ukrainians feel and what you feel about the kind of peace plan, the Trump administration, because I listen to you on LBC News. So I often have either BBC 5 Live, but often if I'm doing short travels, LBC News just gives me the news like whenever I want it. And you were on there, and you were on there for quite a long time. They actually played a pretty long interview with LBC and you about. And this is just, I think it must have been before Trump had that bilateral conversation with Putin above Zelensky's head. And you were quite upbeat about Trump taking over. And actually, people on the ground in Ukraine were strangely, quite upbeat about the potential for Trump making a difference. But I think a week has been an awful long time, because since that interview, I wonder whether you've changed your opinion, because Trump has said some really, I think, bad things for Ukraine. Yeah. And I think there's complete confusion in terms of a foreign policy approach to Ukraine, and pretty much to everything in the world, actually, from the American Secretary of State through to the Department of Defense. You've got Hegseth, you've got the Vice President. Vance came over last night and gave a speech in the Munich Security Conference that went down like a lead balloon. Nobody liked it at all, full stop. And now we're at a position where it looks like Europe might have to take on supporting Ukraine, and eschew the United States, and Ukraine might have to forget about the United States to some degree, although Zelensky's saying we can't do this without the United States. So there are all these elements going on and confusion, but also I think clearly to me, and I'll before you go, I'll leave you with this before you say your piece. I don't think anyone at the top of the United States administration gives one shit about Ukraine from a personal, emotional, political, and moral point of view. And you hear that JD Vance's, the team around JD Vance, Michael Wise was interviewed on the Bulwark last night, and it was a really bloody good interview. And one thing that Michael Wise said is that people don't realize the team around JD Vance, his own personal team, are really, really horrible people. And when people were worried about, you know, what might happen, I forget what he was saying. That there were some people like, oh, it's not going to be too bad, blah blah blah. But we need to worry about JD Vance and who his team are, because they are deeply, deeply anti-Ukrainian. And when you go and then see JD Vance give his speech last night, you start understanding that the people around him are so deeply anti-Ukrainian. Then there's no wonder that he was attacking Europe and not attacking Russia. So anyway, with all of that in mind, what do you now feel about the situation with peace plans in the US, and can you gather what the average Ukrainian might be thinking as well?
Yeah, I mean, I remember running up to the election, warning as much as possible about the dangers of Trump, and that is what everyone was doing in Ukraine to an extent. Was never pro-Trump and really was deeply concerned, but when he was elected, there was a feeling on the ground, and I did a video about this on the day of the results, where Ukrainians just went, okay, the terrible thing has happened. We're not going to spend months and years crying about it and being destitute and super upset about it. We're going to try and make the best out of a bad situation. And that's kind of the Ukrainian attitude in a lot of ways. That's what they've had to do since 2014, is just continue fighting on. And so I reflected that in a lot of ways. I said it's bleak, it's miserable, but in Ukraine, a lot of people feel like, okay, if it's Republicans we have to work with, it's Republicans we have to work with. We'll just, and I started doing a bit of content basically saying, dear Republicans, Ukraine holds your values. It's traditional, it's Christian, it's European. They hold family values. It's
much more than Russia.
Christmas. Yeah, absolutely. And I started emphasizing all of that and saying, if we're going to work with Republicans, let's bring them to Ukraine and let's get them excited about Ukraine. And I would emphasize that Russia is a communist state. The USSR never really fell, it just changed, and that they despise freedom, they despise everything that Republicans should love and hold dear, and those are the enemy of the West and the enemy of America. So that was what my content switched to in a lot of ways, was that. And so when I did that LBC interview, I basically said, hopefully there'll be a situation where Republicans might realize just how terrible the situation actually is with Russia, how it's much more complicated than what you read about on X. And hopefully, because Trump's such a narcissist, because Putin's such a grandstander, that maybe he'll want to prove a point. And I did a lot of this on the back of Sebastian Gorka, who's in Trump's team, who said, if Putin doesn't pull out, then we're going to arm Ukraine to the teeth. And I thought, okay, interesting. There's a possibility here that Republicans might actually do that. And that possibility disappeared the second the delegation arrived here in Kyiv with Jack Posobiec. Do you know who this is?
So, right, and this is really important. So Jack Posobiec is Pizzagate guy who is so fundamentally anti-Ukraine. In fact, he was claiming that he had a hit job being put on him, that, there's a price on his head from Ukraine, blah, 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 blah. If he's part of the delegation going to Kyiv, then I'm sorry, they don't give one shit about Ukraine. And I think people need to understand that. I have people on my threads who are still banging the drum for Trump, still banging the drum for like this administration being the right thing for Ukraine. But if you understand the actual people who are, I'm not talking about Keith Kellogg and John Cole and some of these people who are sensible, but they're sort of sidelined. They're the people, we'll send you to Ukraine, you do your thing. But actually the people that are also going with JD Vance or with Scott Bessant, the Treasury Secretary, who is Posobiec, these people are bad human beings, and they are not good for Ukraine. And you can bang the drum as much as you like in hope that Trump is going to be the right choice for Ukraine, but every indication from the people that actually freaking matter is bad for Ukraine. Sorry, because I can rant for Britain today on that.
Yeah, this was the moment I realized that 10% chance of hope of Trump actually doing something was gone. Because I know who Jack Posobiec is, because he was my co-presenter. I was at Rebel and he was a presenter as well.
Oh, really?
I've communicated with Jack a million times, right? He was my colleague. So I know what he is. And again, this is why my past is quite helpful, because even though it was only for a year, I know who these people are and what circles they operated in, and I have got that context. So I put out a tweet immediately saying, why is this man in Ukraine? He has said that Bucha hasn't happened. He has pushed the conspiracy about biolabs, and he retweets Dugan every 3 seconds. And I know loads more about that, and it got 12,000 likes straight away. And that was quote tweeting him that only had 5K. So I started working on a whole deep dive into him and working with Zarina on this, because I know who he is and all this, and I'm going to do an expose. But that shows the respect that Trump has for Zelensky, that he would send someone like Jack Posobiec, who said Bucha, which is a 40-minute drive over here with mass graves, that it didn't happen, and he was inside Zelensky's office. It shows they do not give one second of time for Ukraine. And it's not even that they hate Ukraine. At this point, they love Russia and hate Ukraine. To send a delegation like that is almost a threat. It is a disgrace. And that's it. So I've gone full blown. That's it. There's not even a 1% thing from
that's fascinating. I mean, Silo Squig here hadn't watched the beginning of this video where you talk about your past, and he still sees you in that past. Proper dodgy character, this Caolan.
The thing I'm talking about right now, yes.
Yeah, do some research on his past in the alt-right a few years back, and I was like,
well, you don't need to do research. You listen to me talking right now. Literally. I mean, but that positioning you had in the alt-right is exactly what is useful right now for knowing people like Jack Posobiec and for knowing, the sorts of disinformation techniques that are so often being used. Absolutely 100%. You are the person to speak to about this. I mean, again, the delegation was all I needed to see. That's it. I don't even think it's worth listening to another sentence that comes out of MAGA at this point. They've made their point. They have rewarded Putin for what he's done by invading the largest country in Europe. That's to give up on Europe. We know what appeasement does. Appeasement is not just what started, but continued World War II. That's America's stance. Fine. The feeling is on the ground now in Ukraine. We don't need them. This country has been through famines, genocide, and the indescribable for decades, for 100 years, and they have survived. They don't need America. It really, really helps, but that's what my friends are telling me who are Ukrainian today. That's what they've been telling me since they saw the statements by J.D. Vance. And I've been talking to a lot of different people in the city here in the last day, and it's like, okay, we don't have America. We don't have America. Hopefully Europe will step up and support us even more. And that's what I'm hoping for too. And I think that's possible if we look at what Keir Starmer's just said, the resolve, because you also have Europe right now, liberal Europe, is already at knockers with America. America's already pissed off Canada by saying they want to make it the 52nd state. They've already upset Mexico.
51st.
They tried to put all these sanctions on Britain. They're already infuriating liberal Europe. So liberal Europe started this on the back foot with the US, and that's why I think it's helping them come together and pool even more to make a point that we're not going to be like MAGA, we're not going to be like the States, we're going to support Ukraine, and I hope for that.
And you could well get a regular, as it's being threatened, regulation of X, of Twitter, by the EU. That's looking like that's going to be a possibility. Then you could get regulation on Tesla. You could get, so some people are saying how you hurt the Trump administration is not through having a public kind of diplomatic spat. It's in their pocket. I mean, these are all billionaires. Trump is completely addicted to the markets and to seeing the financial side of things as an indicator of how successful he is. So if inflation gets hammered, if trade gets hammered, if Tesla gets hammered, then you hurt them in the pocket and you say, right, now you need to change your foreign policy, because there seems to be a big realignment that might be taking place because the US has shot themselves in the foot.
That's exactly what's going to happen. And I think we'll see a huge shift of Europe coming together now and a new type of support for Ukraine that we haven't seen before, which is possible. I mean, we are spending in the United Kingdom less than 0.1% of GDP arming Ukraine. Russia is spending about 47%, I think. Even if every country in Europe doubled their GDP spending on Ukraine, which would be what, from 0.2 to 0.4, negligible, Ukraine would win immediately. That is
Yeah.
everything that Ukraine would need. It's possible. It is definitely possible. And maybe I'm being too much of an optimist, but that's how people feel in Ukraine as well. That it will pull through. And Russia is still on the back foot here. Their economy is still crumbling, despite Trump almost saving it with his delegation. The rubles are now up a little bit. The Black Sea Fleet has been decimated by a country without a navy and without a they're struggling to recruit. They're losing 1,500 soldiers a day. They're still on the back foot. They're still struggling. And if Europe steps up now, it will work. But propaganda is about to go through the roof, because this is now Russia is going to be pumping out disinformation to try and convince Europe that it's a waste of money, that you'll be hearing a lot of fake news, like they've been doing on a light level, about you'll be seeing this. Arena's been investigating this as well. Homeless people on the streets when Zelensky's driving around in a nice car. You'll see a lot more stories like this, a lot more propaganda like this coming out, because now it's going to come to spending and support. And that's the next battle. This war is really going to go to a new level in terms of politics and propaganda. And that's going to really start to use. They don't need it in America anymore. It's going to really be appearing on our news feeds a lot more in the UK, and you'll hear it through right-wing talking points a lot more. Wasted money, no more money for Ukraine. That's where it's going to start going, because that is the next line for Russia. That's the next threat, is how much support Europe's going to give this country. But I'm living hope.
Okay, this is really interesting. So we'll kind of finish on this idea then. So Caolan, you've kind of said this already. Do Ukrainians really feel like bridges have been burnt then over this last week?
I think so. Yeah. The people that I've spoken to who aren't just in media, the hairdresser that I spoke to, people that I just know in the city that I go for drinks with in the last 24 hours have basically written off the United States in its entirety, not just MAGA. They've said, right, that's basically in our world. It no longer exists in terms of helping Ukraine and fixing Ukraine. They're doing whatever they're doing. We're going to focus on ourselves, fighting this war ourselves like they have been, and with Europe. There's no, it's over in that sense. And it wasn't like that before. It wasn't like that before this delegation. The Vance speech, the fact he called Putin first, it's over.
And what do you think about, and I don't suppose you would particularly know, but maybe you do have a few people, a few connections that could be useful. What's your thought on, because I think this is a really difficult path for Zelensky to navigate, because on the one hand, he's going to want to psychologically and intuitively say, well, screw you, US, screw you, Trump, screw you, Hegseth, screw you, Vance. You can take your MAGA and you can shove it up your ass, right? But on the other hand, if he does that, then they will be retributive against Ukraine and they'll lift sanctions on Russia and they could absolutely screw Ukraine over. So you want to keep the US on side whilst also saying, well, you guys aren't going to help us, so we're going to actually put all our eggs in the European basket. So he's got a really difficult job to try and navigate getting the most out of everyone here. And I don't at all like envy him. But do you have any sense of how pissed off maybe people in the Zelensky or in government might be?
I don't know anyone in his inner circles, but I mean, being diplomatic is absolutely the right thing to do. Working with what he has is what Zelensky has always had to do. He's had to work with the small amount of support that he's been given too slow. And that's what he should continue to do. That's what great leadership is.
The latest we're hearing from the US is they are ignoring the court. So the Trump administration seems to be saying, actually, rules and norms don't matter at all. The law doesn't matter. We are becoming the dictatorship, the autocracy that the Ukrainians are trying to fight against. And there's this weird irony that the US was kind of a beacon of democracy that Ukraine wanted to become, but actually now the US is going down a path that is more Russian than it is Ukrainian or European. So Ukrainians are just going to have to shift their idea of what a beacon is, and I guess look towards Europe as being that beacon of democracy. Caolan, I've really enjoyed this conversation, mate. It just honestly, it's so revealing, and there's so much more. I could speak to you for like 6 hours easily, but I need to go to the toilet and you've got things to do. So that's my multiple sclerosis getting the most of me. But look, mate, first of all, can we do this again?
Of course.
Awesome. So much to talk about. Second of all, what are your final words, and where can people find you the best?
Just type my name in anywhere, to Twitter, Instagram, whatever it is, Caolan, and then you can find my reports there. And in the meantime, I'm just going to be editing the Syria documentary. And again, if you want to check out my Patreon, I literally quit my full-time job to do this, and it just pays bills, and I still want to travel more and do it. So if you want to contribute, I do live streams every week, and that could be really, really cool. But it's just Patreon that pays for everything. But it's I'm super grateful that people have supported it already, and it's meant that I can do all this reporting. So it's good. It's good.
Yeah. Anyway, final words from you, Caolan.
Thank you for having me.
Moving stuff, mate. Incredible, forceful. No, I really appreciate it, mate. Stay on the line and we'll say our goodbyes. But in the meantime, to the team watching, really appreciate all of you. You are absolutely fantastic humans. Thanks for your support, and please help out Caolan as well. Take care, and I will speak to you soon.